Now, we as historians use the historical method. We don't use the scientific method as much. But now here's a catch. We're going to talk now about what we might refer to as forensic evidence. And forensic evidence is where history and science overlap. The historical method and the scientific method sometimes come together in forensic evidence. Now, forensic evidence is a growing field. A lot of people want to be forensic specialists, the CSI kind of crowd, that sort of thing. And because what a forensic person does is they try to help, particularly the legal field, find out what historians want to find out, which is what happened and why did it happen. And so, to some degree, forensic specialists are engaged in history. It's usually very recent history. They're trying to solve a crime that may have just happened last year, last month, last week, for that matter. But essentially, they're doing history. But forensic science is, in fact, science as much as it is history. Let me explain this, for example. If I want to know when a tree was planted, that would be a historical question. In what year was this tree planted? Well, there's a scientific approach to finding this out. For example, you may know how this works. You can cut that tree down at its base, and a tree goes through, in 365-day period, it goes through a cycle. It goes through 4 seasons. And as it goes through a cycle, the tree leaves a ring. So the number of rings that you would count on the trunk of that tree indicate how many years that tree has been living. And then a little mathematical equation could probably help you figure out, give or take a year or two, when that tree was planted. That would be a scientific approach to a historical question. That's how kind of forensic science works. Now, we also have, when we're talking about a long time ago, we have something called carbon dating. Carbon dating is a science, but it's applied very much to history. Now, what happens is all living organisms have carbon in them. And when that living organism dies, the carbon starts to decay. And it decays, certain molecules of the carbon decay at a very predictable rate. You can draw a graph. You could say it begins to here, and then in 1 year it goes down to here. Next year it's down to here, and down to here, and down to here. So if I find a piece of an organism, and what would that include? It would include things like paper, which was once tree, this shirt, which is cotton, that's an organism. Anything that was once alive, wood, was once alive, we could figure out when it died by doing a carbon dating test. Again, that is science, but it could help us figure out in what year something happened, or in what year 2 different kind of things happened to determine whether one was the cause of the other. So perhaps I misled you a bit when I said there's a total distinction between the scientific method and the historical method. In forensic science, these 2 things overlap. Now, the most perhaps exciting kind of forensic evidence, you probably heard of it, is DNA evidence. DNA, every single molecule in my body is filled with DNA, and DNA is a blueprint for my entire body. Just a little strand of it has all the information to tell my entire body how to be, what color my eyes are, and how tall I am, and those kinds of things, is in every little bit of my DNA. And DNA, we can take DNA, for example, one of the things we do in history is you can take my DNA and find out from my DNA where my ancestors came from. Whether or not I'm partially Native American, whether or not I'm partially African, my DNA can tell us that. And of course, that's very important to the study of history, because where we came from is the question, is the fundamental question of history. So there is this middle ground, forensic science, which is basically the science that's used in legal contexts, and it is both a science and the work of historians. It's a beautiful thing, and if you're excited about it, that's a good thing. It's a neat science. I know a lot of young people really are excited about becoming forensic experts someday, but you need to study history to be a good forensic scientist. So.